we all sort of go into the industry because we love movies and we want to make movies, but there are also so many cinematographers.
Hi, and welcome to Hollywood On-Ramp, the podcast where we interview successful people in Hollywood about how they got to where they are today. And today we're talking to Paul Yee, director of photography for the movie Joyride.
You know who can bypass airport security? K-pop stars. Everyone remember their names?
Sassy.
Cutie.
Lisa.
Lisa, too.
Hi, Paul Yee.
Hi, Jay. Nice to meet you.
So you were the cinematographer on the movie Joyride. How did you get involved with that?
Well, I did not know Adele.
That's Adele Lim, writer of Crazy Rich Asians, Raya and the Last Dragon, and director of Joyride.
But I met her in late 2019 when I was working on a show for Quibi that was directed by Veena Sood. Veena is close friends with Adele, and she'd known that Adele had just been brought on to direct her first feature film. And she came to visit set, and that's where I met her. I had been familiar with her work on Crazy Rich Asians, which she co-wrote, and then eventually later on Raya, the Last Dragon. Though we didn't have like a real direct connection beforehand, I was and have been a big fan of her work.
It sounds like Quibi did bring some good into the world.
Yeah, that's funny because with every production you put so much time and effort into creating something and conceiving something and bringing it into the world. And then the fact that this project that I did with Veena, which we both really cared about and we loved, had such a short shelf life it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
But I do think, I think a lot about just the connections in my career. And I really am so fortunate that I was part of that project because it introduced me to Adele and then ultimately my first job on a studio feature.
What's the difference working on a studio movie compared to the stuff you've done in the past?
This is actually by far the biggest budget that I've worked on. It's interesting. I think that regardless of the budget size, that making a movie is always chaotic. The biggest difference is that on a studio movie, the expectations are a lot higher as far as on an independent project, which I've done a good bit of, you're a little bit more flexible with the script as far as, if we can't make a location happen or if we can't make a set piece happen, then we rewrite things. My experience on the studio level is that you're sort of just expected to deliver, what's on the page.
Did you feel any hesitation with Lionsgate bringing you on or, anyone involved bringing you on since you didn't have that experience?
To rewind it a little bit, the first time that I was on like a sizable set was the Quibi job that I did with Veena. There was a moment on the first day of that production where I showed up and there were just trucks and trucks and trucks and trailers. And that was something I hadn't been used to before. The movie that I'd done before that was a very small independent movie called Colwell. And that was mostly non-actors and a lot of just sort of young people getting their foot into production for the first time. So I think that having done that project with Quibi and with Veena did sort of acclimate me to what it's like working on a larger set and having to manage larger crews.
What were the biggest challenges you felt on Joyride compared to with what you've done before?
Joyride is a comedy produced by Point Grey, which is Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg's company. They make comedies in the style of like a Judd Apatow production. So there's a lot of flexibility with the script. There's a whole tent of writers. I think on our movie we had like 2 full-time writer producers, like 2 freelance writers, and they're constantly punching up scenes and adding alternative lines. It does create for this like very like just sort of fresh sort of reactive energy on set. And you get really funny stuff that way. But the challenge from a cinematography standpoint is that it's very difficult to predict how to cover a scene because, Jay, you're an editor, so that, coverage is just like eye lines are all over the place when you have like 4 people in a scene. And we had sometimes 10 people in a scene. And there would just be people looking one way and delivering lines all over the place. And then we'd be like, it'd be great to have like 4 or 5 alternative jokes for this line. And that was something that, it was very hard to predict before we did a rehearsal.
How many days did you have to shoot?
We filmed for 34 days.
That's pretty quick for getting all that coverage.
Yeah.
But it's probably a lot longer schedule than you're used to as well.
It did seem like it was a lot of time, but it seemed like as the schedule expands for the project, so does the ambition. Because we certainly could have used more time to get more coverage and just for more alternative lines and more jokes. But ultimately, I've seen the movie, probably close to a dozen times now. And the things that I love about the script, or loved about the script really work for me. And I think the movie is going to be special to a lot of people. And yeah, I'm really excited for people to see it.
You have another movie that's out now, Reality. How different was that from shooting Joyride?
It actually could not have been a more different process. I ended up getting hired to work on Reality after Joyride. And because of the sort of unpredictable nature of filming Joyride and all of the locations and all of the script unpredictability, I told my agent that I really wanted to work on a project that was a lot smaller with, fewer locations. And then I think 3 or 4 months later, she was like, there's this project that takes place in one room and it's based on a transcript. So they literally can't change the dialogue. So I met with Tina, the director, who reached out to me because she was a big fan of The Fits, which is the first feature that I had done. And then we ended up going into production for just a real quick, short 16 days in May of 2022.
It literally is one location and no adlib.
It's that's kind of what is one of the amazing things about Reality is that all of that extra fat from just a conversation that normally gets cut away is there, and it kind of makes it special in a way, because you are sort of reminded throughout the movie that this is real, that this is verbatim, and that this actually is what they were saying. So some of these weird conversations about about their pets and about exercising and CrossFit and weightlifting, it's that all really happened. And I think one of the most striking things about it is that it's so so far from what we conceive an FBI interrogation scene to be. I'm sure you can hear the siren. So
that brings up another question. You're based in New York, is that right?
I am. I'm based in Brooklyn. I went to film school, and I've been here since I graduated in 2005.
Where did you go to school?
I went to NYU. I went to Tisch.
What kind of challenges do you have working in New York? And these movies, I think, were not shot there. So how often do you have to travel?
Well, I've started to shift my career to doing mostly scripted projects. I don't know. It's become increasingly less important to be based in New York since movie productions often, get the green light without even having a location. So sometimes, I'll talk to people and they'll be like, well, maybe we'll shoot in Georgia, maybe we'll shoot in Ohio. It's all just based on what the line producer thinks they can make work with a local tax incentive.
And you have a family. How much time do you spend away?
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old, and I'm in her room right now. Honestly, I think at the moment it seems like I'm quite busy because I have these movies that are sort of out in the world in parallel, Reality and Joyride, and then also a documentary called Jazzilla that's doing its festival run right now. But they're basically the only projects that I've worked on in the past 3 years. The early COVID lockdown was incredibly slow for me. I didn't work from basically the end of 2019 until mid 2021. I was really starting to feel like I was the least desirable candidate for for cinematography work. That's when I booked Joyride. That production was entirely in BC, in Canada. So starting in August of 2021, I was basically out of the country and away from my family for 4 months. And it was super hard. They did come to Seattle for a couple days and we got to see each other for like a weekend. But even at the time, you couldn't visit Canada as just like a visitor. Like you had to be there on a work visa. So they couldn't have stayed with me even if I'd wanted them to. In many ways, like I wish that I'd sort of gotten an earlier start to my cinematography career, because being away from family and being away from home has become such a enormous calculation in whether or not I do a job.
I don't have to travel as much working in post, but I do travel from time to time, and it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, even on that, like when I ended up doing reality just a few months after Joyride wrapped principal production, but that was based in New York, or we filmed in New York. So it hypothetically should have enabled me to spend more time with my family, but I was still up at 5 a.m. every day to be on set by 7 and then getting home at like 8 p.m. So even when you're local, the normal day for being on a production is long and it's brutal.
On a lighter note, let's talk about The Fits. That was the first film that you shot that I was aware of. Really, really loved it. And I didn't realize it was your first film as a cinematographer. So can you talk a little bit about how that came about?
I think this is an interesting project to think about in retrospect, because I, for the longest time, wanted to be the cinematographer for a feature film. And it's something that I think a lot of cinematographers, it's just like an elusive goal that a lot of cinematographers have, because we all sort of go into the industry because we love movies and we want to make movies, but there are also so many cinematographers that want to work on features that the jobs are so hard to come by. I had met the director Anna when we were very young. We went to NYU together and we worked in sort of like the production rental facility together and became really close friends. And we worked on crews together where I was like a grip or a electrician and she was a camera assistant. And then as we got older, she started working on producing things, and then eventually applied to the Venice Biennale College, which is sort of like a feature film lab, like incubator competition that's run by the Venice Film Festival. And she was granted a small amount of money to make her first feature. I had very, very little scripted experience up to that point. And basically just got that job because we were such close friends and collaborators on other sort of smaller things like music videos and documentaries. Yeah, I mean, I'm just really still so fortunate that that movie connected with so many people. Up until recently, pretty much all of my job interviews have started with somebody saying that they're a huge fan of The Fits. And it's been such a blessing in that way. Because it really changed my career trajectory in a big way.
Yeah, I bet. I can't imagine that you had that thought in mind when you started making the movie.
It's hard to put myself in the mindset of where I was in 2015 or 2016. But at the time, it was a very comfortable situation. It was basically me making a movie with essentially some of my best friends. We were all kids that went to film school together, and we had basically creative freedom. And there wasn't a financier or a studio that had any opinions about what we were doing. The trade-off was that we didn't really have much money to work with.
But it's interesting that, when you put talented creative people, give them freedom to make something, then it turns out to be something that people talk about for years and years.
Absolutely.
After college, you started out working, I think, as a grip and a gaffer. Did you know you were aiming towards cinematography on scripted features at that point, or were you just kind of trying to figure out what your place was in the business?
When I graduated from school, I didn't know that I wanted to go into cinematography. I had worked on quite a few short films as the cinematographer, but I was really at the time more concerned with just making a living and being able to pay my rent in New York. So I ended up just working on like extremely low budget movies and even student films sometimes where I was being paid as as an experienced gaffer. Just sort of worked my ranks up in the lighting department until I was gaffing on feature films, like independent features. Eventually, after working on it on enough movies, it was just sort of became exhausting, like physically exhausting for my body to continue doing that. So I did end up buying a camera, which was like a Panasonic HVX 200, which was really one of the last sort of prosumer camcorders that was being used professionally, and transitioned my income generating into videography and filming, advertising work, documentaries, then very, very slowly over time started to work on more creative projects like music videos. My path to becoming a cinematographer has been a lot slower and more indirect than other cinematographers. And I think part of it is because I wasn't able to really lock in and focus on shooting and lensing projects when I was in my early and mid 20s and I had little responsibilities outside of working.
I'm just going to put a pin in that real quick, because
Sure.
could you describe what it is that a gaffer does for people who maybe aren't familiar with the way a set works?
Well, a gaffer is basically the head of the lighting department and the head of the electricians. Basically, they work in tandem with the director of photography to figure out how a set and a scene should be lit, and then also work with the electricians to determine how the set should be powered.
You're working hand in hand with the cinematographer. Is it common for a cinematographer to start out as a gaffer?
I think it is something that you see. I mean, I think it's much more common for camera assistants to then become operators, and then for operators to become cinematographers and then directors of photography. Just a learning curve that I went through was that I was on set a whole bunch as a gaffer, but I wasn't really by the camera. I wasn't really learning much about lensing and learning about coverage and about how to maintain like lighting continuity during a scene, which are really important things to know as a cinematographer. So I think that was something that took me a little bit longer to figure out, as opposed to someone who's in the camera department who's really attached to that monitor all day.
Once you got your own camera and started shooting other things, that's where you started to kind of figure all of that out?
I really learned how to film a project just by going through the prep process and then the production and then the finishing in color. I feel like that's where you learn the impact of all the decisions that you're making, because it's not really until something is finished that you can see whether or not your earlier decisions are working or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I feel like people on set don't always see the impact in post of what they've done.
Yeah, well, I mean, the last few projects I've worked on have had editors cutting, basically starting after the first day or two. And I find it's incredibly helpful to get that feedback from them, where they're saying, oh, we need more coverage, or this isn't working, or, these angles don't match. In many ways, like, I dread getting an email from an editor because it usually means there's like something that I'm doing wrong, but also they are usually right. Usually.
we try to compliment the good work too.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people starting out and wanting to become a cinematographer or wanting to work in the camera or electric departments?
If I had to give advice to a cinematographer at the beginning of their career, it would be to really listen to the directors that you're working with and pay attention to them, and to try to deliver on their vision and put them in a situation where they can succeed. I like to think of myself almost as like a visual translator for what they're trying to get across. And I find that everybody is happiest when the director feels like they're doing a good job.
When you are hiring people for the camera department or you're interviewing somebody to be a camera assistant, what are you looking for?
As a department head, I am always looking to hire people who are obviously talented at what they do, but also are people who seem like they have the right kind of attitude for being on set, people who can put up with the stress and the chaos and also just be a pleasant person to be around for 13 or 14 hours a day or in the middle of the night. I do like working with other people who are patient and who are willing to have conversations about why we're doing things a certain way. So those are the sort of things I value in people I work with. Are they able to listen and respond?
Hit subscribe for more interviews like this one with I'm a Virgo co-showrunner Zichun.
I made a schedule for myself to write and direct a no-budget short film every 6 months and write a feature film every 9 months. And I did that for 3.5 years. And part of it was just a numbers game, like knowing that okay, I need to get better at it. I know that I am only going to get better at it if I'm doing it. I'm not going to finance some there were kids who were spending $50,000 on their short film. And I was like, I'm going to spend between $100 and $1,000 on these short films. And my short film that got into Sundance, the budget of that was $600.